Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I always say it's morning, and then I realize right after I say it that it's not morning for anyone else except for me. We have a full panel today. Ben Toth and Paige Hungry. I believe it's 6 p.m. We got Dust James on the road somewhere on the East Coast. I think it's probably 6 p.m. where Dust is. Where are you driving, Dust?
In North Carolina. It's
North
noon.
So it's noon, yeah.
North Carolina. And Greg, you're in Chicago. It's about 2 hours difference from
Yeah,
the
we're
West
11
Coast,
a.m.
11 a.m. Carlo Parcelli in Washington, D.C., and it's noon too there, right?
Satan's anus, baby.
Same things. Uh, Ian should be joining us. He said he was going to be able to make it. He might be having some technical difficulties, but we do have, it's going to be a very full panel. Title of our program was Good Tear Gas, Bad Tear Gas. And that really just is a reflection of the hypocrisy of, protests. The official response to protests really just depends on how it benefits Western imperialism.
Did anybody get the notebook? Because I don't have like a rules-based order notebook to tell which one's the good, which one's the bad. I'm just seeing what they write about them. It'd be handy to have one.
Yeah, the rules-based order, there's no rules. The rules are the rules we say they are, and we're not obliged to follow the rules. I mean, that's just the crazy way it works. And there are no rules. The rules are, whatever we say they are. But we've got protests all over college campuses across the U.S. opposing genocide, opposing the state of Israel. Those are bad protests, very bad. We have protests in Georgia. They're protesting that Georgia wants to, the country of Georgia, that Georgia wants to, have a little bit of sovereignty, and they want to kick out these NGOs whose job it is to, push, Georgian policy, political policy in line with Western imperialism. So Georgia says, no, we want to have some sovereignty. We're going to have a law that's not even as strong as the laws on the books in the United States, right, Carlo?
Right.
Yeah.
And you keep hearing it's called the Russian law in Georgia. It's the fucking American law. It's been in place since 1938.
We were
And
the
I'm gonna
first.
to all of our ex-Soviet Georgian fans out there. I'm gonna read the law to you in brief, okay? It's not one little paragraph. It's the FARA law, Foreign Registration Act, was enacted to require individuals doing political or advocacy work on behalf of foreign entities in the United States, 1938, to register with the Department of Justice and to disclose their relationship activities, receipts, and disbursements in support of their activities. And it's not even 20%. This law,
It's
this
any amount,
American
right?
law, is not
Because
even 20% of your donations coming from foreign entities. It's any amount coming from a foreign entity. So I can't tell you how this frustrated it makes me to see thousands of people so duped because you have the delusion that people are brighter than that, that they're smarter than that. There's some progressive element going on, and it's not. They're fools. They're dupes. I kept emailing out. I kept looking for Victoria Nuland in the crowd handing out cookies. That's what it seemed like to me. What
So
idiots!
there's some serious protests going on again in the state of Georgia, the country, the nation state of Georgia, opposing this legislation that says NGOs have to, register, and they have to explain where their funding comes from. A lot of people in Georgia, the pro-Western element, are very angry, and they're taking to the streets. But Ben, didn't that law pass Parliament?
it passed the second reading, so there's one more to go. But there's a slight wrinkle because Georgia, by the way, I got some numbers which you'll enjoy. It's like 4 million people, 2 Budapests, less than half of Hungary. It's a small nation. And apparently, according to an MP, I'm not going to try this name, but I will try some others. There's 20,000 of them in this little Georgia, meaning one NGO per every 150 people. Do you know how saturated that country is with these NGOs? And now there's this Georgia Dream Party. They passed both of these, okay? And they're the ones that the guy who launched it, yeah, he's a billionaire, and they call him billionaire, kingmaker, corrupt, all of that Western stuff. He made his money with connections with Russia. But the president, who I'm not going to try, a woman that has bitch in it, like something bitchvilly, I think is her name. She grew up. She was born in fucking France. She grew up in France. Her parents ran from the Soviet fucking Great October Revolution, 1920, to France. It's exactly like the liberal opposition to the Hungarian. We have the same, you know, the Sovereignty Protection Bureau. It's about the same if you get money from abroad. And all of these foreign fuckers. She went along with the good democracy-loving protesters. Then this opposition guy came to the fore, and he had a very good counter protest where he said, this fucking war party, man, we're going to get rid of it. And then there were efforts to disperse them, the pro-democracy protests. And they used all the same tools that you see on university campuses, but they were the totalitarian, horrible stuff. In front of the Soviet era parliament, all you need is the word Stalinist in there somewhere. Basically, all of it was deep, dark, totalitarian nightmare. And just at the same time, there's also Robert Fico's government in Slovakia, where he's passing a law to do pretty much the same with the main media channel, right? The main national TV, which is infested with these NGOs and constantly does this pro-EU, anti-government content. He passes this, and apparently 10,000 freedom-loving what do you call them? Slovaks are now in the streets in Bratislava fighting for their true future and democracy and the European and NATO way. That's the good protesters versus bad, horrible Putinist governments. That's one aspect to the title.
And it's another month before the third reading, so you can expect this for another month.
Yeah.
And then maybe after it's passed, it'll die down.
Yeah.
We'll have to see.
Salom, whatever her name, bitchvilly, the president is probably going to veto it, and then she's going to have the hot seat, I think. We'll see.
The U.S. seems really kind of worried. I mean, the way that these are escalating and ramping up these protests, and it just seems like the West is really concerned that this is a big deal. They're about to lose the state, the nation state of Georgia. Because they really rely on this soft power apparatus to control the government and to make sure they don't have sovereignty. So they seem really scared. Hopefully, the third reading, it gets passed. I'm sorry that it takes a whole month for that to happen, because who knows what kind of shenanigans the West is going to be able to, pull out of their hat in the next month. But so that kind of that's basically,
Can I add just a little bit to that? Because everyone in their grandmother in Europe, these plastic unelected bastards, Ursula, Charles Michel, all three Baltic midgets and the Polish foreign ministers, everybody rushed to social media or official declarations to condemn the crackdown on the protests. And I'll tell you why. They're afraid that this is their future, because they put everything on Ukraine. And now the people are saying, well, fuck you. And they think they're right. They're not afraid of Russia. They're not afraid of what they're constantly reading. I just look for this phrase, hybrid warfare and Russian interference. That's not what they're afraid of. They're afraid of their people discovering shit. They were wealthy countries once. They had prosperity. All of that is gone on the altar that we call, Banderastan. And these fuckers are directly responsible. I think that's a wonderful thing, this panic. And I think I know where it is.
Well, protests are just a euphemism for Russian hybrid warfare. And you know this, Ben.
It is now, yeah. Yeah.
Other protests going on, there's other bad protests in France. There was, I know, somebody, Ben, you had that juxtaposition of protests in France versus protests in Venezuela.
Yeah, we can play. Remember, it's the rich, sophisticated Paris, the heart of Europe, and the poor, backwards, totalitarian dictatorship of Islam or Venezuela. It's May, International Labor Day, whatever it's called. We just call it Labor Day now. And so basically, this is how these two went. They were huge clashes.
Was that Macron on the right? Is that Macron?
No, it isn't.
Because that's Chavez. Not Chavez. That's what's his name?
It is Maduro on the left
Maduro,
when
yeah,
the camera
Maduro on
zoom
the
in.
left.
And it's just among the people, red shirts,
Yeah.
all that. It's a poor, impoverished place, still, under multiple sanctions. That's how they treat their leader. Just reminds me, every photograph I see of the totalitarian, what do you call it, blood-sucking, horrific, parasitic Kim Jong-un. He's always among a sea of people. I don't really even see security there. But yeah, that's the contrast. That was the May Day protest.
So those were bad protests on the right, obviously.
Yes, they were anti-NATO, anti-Olympics, and basically anti-funding Ukraine. And anti-Macron, obviously.
And then you
Can
got a good.
Can I interject a comment on the hypocrisy of the
Yes,
Georgian
please.
law? Yeah, I think it's extremely hypocritical of the United States to get mad at Georgia for wanting to protect their sovereignty against U.S. interests, CIA money, NGOs. It's pretty obvious what's going on. But then in the United States, if we look at the labor movement, we look at civil rights, we look at oppressed people, we look at Chicanos. Every time workers and oppressed people want to stand up for themselves, it's the Russians intermingling. When it was American unions, it was Black Americans, it was Chicano Americans, or people who didn't identify with America, standing up for themselves. And then that's the Russians somehow doing it. It's crazy. Now they're doing it on the campuses now too. They're like, somehow the Palestinian protesters are Russian.
Just to add to what you're saying, get ready that it's not just going to be Russian and Chinese interference, but Iranian hybrid warfare. The blame game has begun, that the protests are Iranian soft power in the US. Get ready for that.
It's Hamas. Hamas has infiltrated our universities, and it's not just they're not just in Gaza. I mean, that's been flatly asserted. I've heard different Israeli politicians flatly assert that.
I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to add to what you were saying. If you wanted to go anywhere else, just go.
No,
on.
I was done.
Yes, please.
I think I specifically mentioned the Uhuru Three, who were basically told they were Russian assets for having someone on a Zoom call.
Can you contextualize that? So, what is the Uhuru movement, right? That's a rather small.
Yeah, they're a legacy group going back to the 70s, and they actually have some real connections in Jacksonville, around Florida. And their offices were raided by the FBI, and 3 of the members of the organization have FBI charges. And supposedly for being Russian agents, and the only case against them is one government employee of Russia was interviewed on a Zoom call on a line.
Holy shit!
That's it.
Guilty by association. This is the chairman Amali Yashitela. That's the Uhuru movement? Just so I don't get them mixed up.
Yes.
Who's in jail, right?
No, he is specifically. They have major FBI charges against him.
So he's
basically a way of defunding. No, he's not detained. It's a way of basically making them fight for their legal rights, so they can't empower the press.
Yeah, it seems like they've just pissed off the establishment, and the establishment is doing what it does in trying their best to destroy the movement. And there's no reason, there's no justification. All the charges are bogus. But that's what happens in a dictatorship.
I'm just thinking about the weight of this. Imagine, I know we're a small show and we're not going to have, but having the deputy ambassador of Russia to the UN, Dmitry Polyansky, on this show, and suddenly the show's pulled. That's kind of what we're talking about. Guilty by association by talking to someone.
Yeah, it would be nice if they just pulled our show and didn't prosecute us for being Russian agents, because that would
right.
probably
That's
be
the bare
kind of
minimum.
expensive and kind of probably turn our lives upside down. But anyway, still, if the ambassador would like to come on, we are more than happy to host him.
Yes, we are.
So, Israel was a big topic last week. We talked about, Max's great article on, how the Soviet Union was part of the process of the creation of the state of Israel. And we talked a bit about how the Zionist lobby, how powerful it is, how it's able to, wield influence in a way that benefits Israel. But we have acknowledged that there's a wide diversity of thought. Dust was hoping to get a more Marxist-Leninist, perspective from Max and us maybe last week. I know Greg had listened to, or, he heard Dust's request, and he has put together a bit of a presentation on kind of laying out the actual Marxist-Leninist approach as he sees it to understanding the power of the Zionist lobby. I don't know if that's a fair way to introduce it or not, Greg.
More or less.
Would you like to maybe start with that, or does anybody else have anything they want to say before we start?
Do you have some preparatory statements, or should we start with the video that you're so kindly already shared with us?
Oh, that's towards the end. So yeah, I was going to talk a bit first.
Yeah, please go.
Go ahead.
Okay. So as Billy said, this is to follow up on the last episode and Dust James' request to provide a Marxist-Leninist perspective on U.S.-Israel foreign policy. I cover some comments on the thorny subject of the Zionist lobby and anti-Semitism, as well as a sketch of the political science around the question of the lobby and foreign policy. First, why do Marxist-Leninists oppose anti-Semitism? In short, anti-Semitism has a long, ugly history, and we oppose all oppression. And second, anti-Semitism has a destructive effect on working class unity and derails the class war. As Stalin wrote in 1934, national and racial chauvinism is a vestige of the misanthropic customs characteristic of the period of cannibalism. Anti-Semitism, as an extreme form of racial chauvinism, is the most dangerous vestige of cannibalism. Anti-Semitism is of advantage to the exploiters as a lightning conductor that deflects the blows aimed by the working people at capitalism. Anti-Semitism is dangerous for the working people as being a false path that leads them off the right road and lands them in the jungle. Hence, communists, as consistent internationalists, cannot be but irreconcilable sworn enemies of anti-Semitism. In the USSR, anti-Semitism is punishable with the utmost severity of the law as a phenomenon deeply hostile to the Soviet system. Under USSR law, active anti-Semites are liable to the death penalty. So talking about the Zionist lobby in itself is not anti-Semitic. It is clearly real and exercises influence, particularly domestically, where it pushes to ban BDS and enact legislation equating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Also, many sincere Jewish and non-Jewish commentators are proponents of this explanation for U.S. West Asia foreign policy, but it cannot be denied that this explanation mirrors the structure of modern anti-Semitism, as it states that a small group of Zionists or Jews are corrupting key nations around the world for their own benefit. Zionism, a reactionary right-wing ideology, depends on anti-Semitism as its reason for existence, and arguably is an anti-Semitic movement itself, with Zionists having a history of working with the Nazis and themselves perpetuating anti-Semitic stereotypes. The statistics in paper Billy read from on Tuesday about U.S. Jewish disproportionate money in politics was published in Israel. where they are seemingly bragging about Jews' disproportionate political power and proudly reinforcing a classic anti-Semitic trope. In an interview with Electronic Intifada, researcher Tony Greenstein, author of Zionism During the Holocaust, The Weaponization of Memory in the Service of State and Nation, quotes Zionist philosopher and author Jacob Klatzen, who is the editor of the paper Die Welt, as writing, quote, "If we don't admit the rightfulness of anti-Semitism, we deny the rightfulness of our own nationalism." The first pamphlet by Theodor Herzl, called The Jewish State, states on page 26 that the cause of anti-Semitism, its immediate cause, is our excessive production of mediocre intellectuals who cannot find an outlet, downwards or upwards. That is to say, no wholesome outlet in either direction. When we sink, we therefore become a revolutionary proletariat, the subordinate officers of all revolutionary parties. And at the same time, when we rise, there rises also the terrible power of our purse. So there you have it. He accepted all the caricatures. Jews were either too rich or they were revolutionary and subversive. So what was the answer? It was to form a Jewish state where Jews could congregate. Further, Greenstein quotes Burl Katzenelson, who was deputy to Ben-Gurion and saw the rise of Hitler as, quote, "an opportunity to build and flourish like none we have ever had or will have." Ben-Gurion himself said that the Nazis' victory will become a fertile force for Zionism. Greenstein also documented that the Zionist movement lobbied the Nazis to not allow Jews to go out of Germany anywhere but Palestine, and Palestine could only admit 15,000 at maximum per year, which was the British rule. So what did that mean? The rest would stay in Germany and perish. Do Zionists corrupt U.S. foreign policy towards Israel and the region as commonly charged in progressive critique? Before getting into that question, what is U.S. foreign policy and interest in the Middle East? To provide a brief sketch over the last 100 years of U.S. involvement in West Asia, there are three broad phases. Phase 1 began after World War I. Unlike Britain and France, the U.S. had no troops or colonies in the region post-war, only investors. Significant investment by U.S. capitalists in Middle East oil began with the creation of the Turkish Petroleum Company, which was later renamed the Iraq Petroleum Company. This company was initially a British-owned company, but was later internationalized to include American, French, and Dutch interests. The Red Line Agreement, signed in 1928, was crucial. It was an agreement among oil companies, including Standard Oil of New Jersey, later Exxon, Standard Oil of New York, later Mobil, to restrict oil exploration and production in the former Ottoman territories outside of Iran to the Iraq Petroleum Company. This agreement effectively divided control and profits from the oil in the vast region among these major international companies. The Iraq Petroleum Company remained active until it was nationalized by Iraq in 1972. These companies are now back after the Second Iraq War, finally. Phase 2 began after World War II. After the war, U.S. involvement was more direct. All U.S. embassies in West Asia were directed to negotiate oil concessions, and one of FDR's last diplomatic efforts was to secure the still active U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia, which exchanged access to the oil for defense guarantees. As Max Perry discussed on Tuesday, the U.S. was initially more ambivalent towards Israel and tried to keep good relations with the Arab states. U.S. support towards Israel entered its third phase with the 1967 war and Nixon's dramatically increased support after Israel successfully beat back Soviet allies Egypt and Syria. Aid increased from millions to billions of dollars per year. This began the full period of unambivalent and generous support towards Israel, along with partner U.S. proxy regional police Iran, plus continued support for the Gulf monarchies and Arab comprador regimes, which continues till now. Going back to the question of corruption, how does progressive political theory understand the state and representative democracy generally? I asked prominent liberal progressive intellectual ChatGPT to provide a brief summary. It stated, quote, "The state can function as an impartial arbiter of public interest provided it is structured and reformed appropriately through measures such as campaign finance reform, lobbying, regulations, and transparent governance. The state can effectively represent the balance diverse interests, prevent any single class or group from dominating, and ensure fair policy making that benefits the broader society. The focus is on reforming and perfecting the democratic apparatus to shield it from being hijacked by narrow, corrupt, or elitist interests, thus allowing it to function as a true democracy." So in this view, the Zionist lobby is seen as corrupting the U.S. to act outside of public interest or against national values and in the interest of a few wealthy ideological Zionists. If we shine enough light, then the appropriate lobby reforms could be enacted to restrain the lobby and return the U.S. foreign policy to a more rational and humane grouping. Let's contrast this with the Marxist theory of the state, which is simply that it is an instrument of class war and control. The key question is which class controls the state. In State and Revolution, Lenin wrote in 1917, "A democratic republic is the best possible shell of capitalism. And therefore, once capital has gained control of this very best shell, it established its power so securely, so firmly, that no change, either of persons or institutions, or of parties in the bourgeois democratic republic, can shake it. Revolution alone can put an end to the bourgeois state." So for Marxists, the key question is whether supporting Israel is contrary to the interest of the U.S. capitalist ruling class. I'll wrap up with this 3-minute clip from YouTube station Jedel English, where the progressive interviewer challenges Tunisian Marxist Mac Agel on this question.
Go.
Ben?
Yep.
America could normalize Israel's relationship with other neighboring countries, say Saudi Arabia, especially United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, but other places, like as they did with Egypt. So America could slowly leave the region, tilt to Asia, go and spend most of its energy towards China, and not being worried so much about this place. Yeah? And Israel doesn't want that. Israel is like dragging America back into West Asia. As we've seen in the last 192 days, Biden says, we don't want a wider war. We don't want escalation in the region. We don't want to see a war with Iran. And Netanyahu says, it's not up to you, mate. You're going to see it. We will force you. We will drag you into a war. Yeah? That's the image that people are portraying. And US wants to go to Ukraine. I mean, especially Democrats are desperate to spend more in Ukraine, whereas Netanyahu is like dragging them back into West Asia. And that's like more like Mearsheimer and Walt theory, that is because of the role of the lobby. So it's a contingent matter to America. It's like something which came out of that specific history of US-Israel relationship, but it had life of its own. It was almost like an organ which became oversized, and now it's like endangering the life of the overall body. Whereas in your idea, and also Ali Qadri's idea, it's not the case. And Israel is still essential to the interest of US imperialism. So let's start from that. Looking back to the last 192 days, what price do you think America has paid for defending Israel in 2023 and 2024?
How's the stock market doing?
In what sense?
Well, how's the stock market doing over the last 6 months? I mean, it's doing fine, right? It's doing fine. So it's a very broad brush indicator. But my point is that the stock market is one of the ways we can register the health of the perspectives of the U.S. investor class who controls the empire, right? They're not particularly upset with this war. In fact, there's now some dissension occurring over the war, and there's different perspectives about how to continue to prosecute the war, right? But overall, the war has not been harmful to the process of worldwide accumulation. I mean, people are generally okay with the war. Not only, so that raises the question, first of all, why are people okay with the war? It's like, what's necessary to maintain the health of overall accumulation? What's necessary to maintain inequality? What's necessary to maintain capitalism, right? These questions I feel like these questions are very much bracketed. They're walled off. They're not entered into by people who are putting forth this hypothesis that somehow the war is damaging U.S. empire. Somehow the war is damaging U.S. capitalism. Well, what is the alternative to the war, first of all, right? What is the alternative to the war?
That's where that clip ends.
So
welcome to Blowback, the talk show where we watch other talk shows. Sorry, it was good and informative. I just joke thought.
My final thought is Edgel's not contradicting the thesis of this show, namely the U.S. empire is in decline, but rather reminding us that imperialism serves the top capitalists who have no choice but to engage in imperialism, no matter the holistic destructive effects.
But he didn't. He misspoke. I mean, first of all, the stock market is down.
Can you show the stock market, Ben?
I don't actually see it. I did at the beginning of the show, but I can't see it.
It was
back up.
It was poking 40,000, and now it's down to 37 something. But it's not because he's right. It's not because of the genocide in Gaza. It's
the
because
blue
of
dot there is the day
sanctions
before
that
the
shot
war.
themselves in the foot. Yeah, that's down about 2,000 points. So he's wrong about that.
Since the beginning of the war, it's way up.
It's
declined a little bit in the last couple of months over the interest rates, but
yeah, it's not.
This is a happy market.
It's not what he said it was, and it certainly was. It certainly didn't go up because of the war in Gaza.
That's debatable. That's debatable.
Right. That's a happy market.
No, it isn't. It's not debatable.
Yes, it is. A lot of the stock market is the Russian manufacturers, and if there's escalation of conflict, then that has direct effects on the stock market. Even rumors of escalation of conflict can have beneficial effects.
Fair point.
And when there is threats of broadening conflicts, there may be lower oil production from the competitors, or at least a more conservative bent to oil production, which can increase the monopoly and also
that's
the
too
U.S.
simplistic of you. I'm sorry.
No, true.
When it comes to the stock market, that's way too simplistic.
Okay, but it's the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So what industry does America have other than the war industry? I think that's a fair point to make, that it's mostly Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. These people are very happy. I think that's a fair point. As for the actual economic indicators, there was a very interesting, let me just say this, and it's your court, Carlo, where the Bloomberg found this poll somewhere that apparently U.S. businesses are way more optimistic than consumers, and that the belief in a strong economy when it comes to business was 80%. When it comes to people, it was just 20%. So Joe Biden can say best economy ever in the goddamn million years. The people don't feel like that. Even though the stock market, this big casino of futures for the big corporations, is looking fantastic for them. Go, Carlo.
Joe Biden does not have a southern accent. He's a northern.
That's my bad Joe Biden.
The way the stock exchange is tallied, excuse me, is they have a select group of corporations. I think it's 20. And it's not
That was 30,
exclusively,
yeah.
not nearly exclusively, the military-industrial complex. They're not in what factors into the Dow Jones daily average. They're not involved in that calculation.
What is that?
It was
What
a
are
very
these?
loose analysis, but I think the overall point of the speaker from the
But
video
it's
was
not, they don't influence that average. So what that average reflects is, first of all, grifting. They're stealing from Dust. They're stealing from Billy Bob and his family, and Dust and his family, and they're stealing from me and my family, because they saw an opportunity to raise prices because of places like Ukraine and other and this worldwide
So conflict has a
destabilization.
positive effect on the stock market.
What's that?
So conflict has usually has a positive effect on the
Yeah,
stock
because that's the nature of the
Yeah.
machine.
It
But I
rallied-
understand your point
That's
being that
essentially what he's saying.
a lot of
But
it
if
is
it-
fake. I do understand that part
It
too.
rallied for years after the Iraq War started, much to my surprise.
So I'm not
Did
sure. I mean,
did we
we're getting kind of
misrepresent you,
caught
Carlo?
up. I want to kind of really focus on Greg's presentation and if there's any, what our overall opinion is. So Carlo, I'm not sure what you're saying regarding Greg's perspective. I know you're taking issue with the fact that the guy in the video said the stock market was doing well, but if you look at the graph since the war started, the stock market is way up. I mean, it's up considerably since before the war started. So, I mean, that's a fair
Yeah,
point.
before the war started, it was up.
Well,
And
did you
it's
see the
still up.
chart? Did you see the chart? So the war started here, and it was down at 34, and then it went down a bit, and then it's just been way up. It's been way up over what it was since the war started.
Yeah, but
Christy,
which war? Which war are you talking about?
That's the
Israel's
October 7th.
Gaza war.
Yeah,
This is
okay.
10,
October
10-7.
Okay, so, but you also have Ukraine to consider.
Yeah, for 2.5 years. Wait, we have a viewer question. Maybe it's best for you and Greg to address Christy Darsness here. I hope I pronounced that right. What do you guys think?
Can you read the question?
I can read it out, of course. Other than history, what is the fundamental difference between anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, and any other intolerance/prejudice? Politics, the stock market?
I don't know if there is one.
The way they're manipulated by the ruling class to maintain their power. That's about it.
Okay, I don't want to be unfair to any perspective. I got Dust's point, which I think is valid, that a lot of at least the Dow Jones Industrial Average has to do with weapons manufacturers. I got the other point from Carlo that a lot of that is fake. We had very good evidence of that this week, because Apple lost like 10% of its smartphone market in China, and it went tumbling down. And then it did the biggest stock buyback in history, which is, basically fraud in any other country. And then it climbed like 8% in stock value. So I get both of those points. I hope I treated those perspectives fairly. But yeah, the US economy, other
Boeing
than the
is
casino
part
and the
of the
grift
Dow.
and stealing from everyone, is still based on war material. Bad war material, as it turns out now. Was that fair? What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's Starbucks is on the verge of collapse in a lot of
Starbucks and McDonald's, yeah, they're running out of rich Americans, and they're betting on a future in China where there's actual rich, wealthy, what they call a middle class.
whose perspective is more accurate? I mean, do we see a big distinction between the two people in the video?
If I could clarify my position, like it doesn't even have to the stock market barely physically represents industry itself. And a lot of it has to do with banking, which is also removed from production. And a lot of it is simply the general feeling of the capitalist ability to invest. They seem to like conflict, as our other speaker said, with the rise in stock market.
I mean,
Was that the clutch?
why worry about the stock market? You've got tens of thousands of innocent people dying in Gaza.
He was just making a point. The speaker was just making a point about how the ruling class benefits. Okay, so they're saying the evil Zionist lobby is the liberal was saying the evil Zionist lobby is having undue influence on the American government. And yes, Israel's lobby actually controls some U.S. politicians do so. But if you look at who is actually controlling overall the U.S. government, the monopoly capitalists, they are the primary beneficiaries of the existence of Israel and Israel's attack and influence on maintaining the entire region as a dependent, isolated, poverty-stricken region.
Yeah, I get that. I agree with all that. I just think bringing the stock market in as the example sometimes is too convenient a trope.
Between the two of you, can we agree that I think it's a measure of well-being for the richest people in America, the mass industrialists and all that, and it just keeps going up every time there's a conflict? Is that fair, Carlo? They love. I don't care about the stock market. Yeah, I know. They seem to love when the graph goes up, right?
We have what Smedley Butler's for an example of that. I mean, he lays the blame on major corporations. So, I mean, that's been self-evident all along. But all I'm saying is to involve the stock market now, given all of its machinations, which most of which I don't understand. The derivatives and that sort of thing.
Well, I try to, and I don't know.
Mathematical algorithmic nonsense that they do. Most of what occurs there is just on paper. It's not like it's really what Dust is saying. It's not industry. It's just manipulation of paper, and what that has to do ultimately with one industry or another is oversimplified when you lay it on one industry or another.
Not to be too boring, but let me read through the companies in the Dow. There's 30 of them.
30, right? Okay.
United Healthcare Group, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, Home Depot, Caterpillar, a manufacturer who is involved in the war, Amgen, McDonald's Corporation.
Oh, I want to add, Home Depot is owned by the same corporation that used to own the Z Blackwater, which was private contract.
Okay. Oh, to add to that, there's a whole lot of cross ownership when it gets to this level of. Sorry, continue, Greg.
Salesforce, Visa, American Express, Travelers, Honeywell, manufacturer, JP Morgan, Chase, Amazon, Boeing, an arms manufacturer, Apple, Intel, Procter & Gamble, Chevron, oil, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Walt Disney, 3M, Nike, Coca-Cola, Walmart, Dow, Chemical, I assume that is, Cisco Systems, Verizon Communications, and Intel.
I was surprised NVIDIA wasn't in there, but a lot of banks were, meaning the guys who lend out money with the prospect of getting much, much more back. So
that's pretty educational. It's like a basket of goods that they just arbitrarily assign and gives us this basic measure of overall economic well-being. And it has its uses. It has its drawbacks. When I watched that back and forth between the two gentlemen in the video, and the guy on the right, he says the U.S. investor class controls the U.S. empire, and he acknowledges that the U.S. investor class has different perspectives. So I don't see a disagreement between those two people. Once you admit that the U.S. investor class has different perspectives, I mean, you're essentially, you're in alignment. You're in broad agreement with the other side that says, there's an influential Zionist lobby that is doing what it can to push U.S. policy in a certain direction. So, again, if you have this many innumerable political factions that have different interests, but also an overlapping broad interest, obviously, in this case, it's an overlapping interest to support Israel and keep the Israel project alive. But there's also a disagreement on tactics, like how should Israel behave? And they fight it out behind the scenes, and what results is the actual policy. And so right now, Biden, due to a lot of political considerations regarding Israel, is really trapped as far as what he can do to as far as policies in order to make sure he has a chance in the next election. So he's kind of constrained by these political considerations, and those political considerations include donors. It also includes public opinion and
I think
shifting
that's
public opinion.
a little idealistic. I mean, if we
Okay.
look at the foreign policy, it's set a few times a century. It doesn't alter. I mean, when Adja was saying there's some back and forth, that's over tactics. He was saying there is no option to the war, which I think is the essential point, is that, the U.S. ruling class understands Israel has to fight a war now.
Yeah.
And, they might not want to, most of them don't want to expand to Iran, and there's some strategy and tactic issues. But the existential nature of this war is not really debated, or
True,
supporting Israel.
I think Billy Bob's point remains that it's very inconvenient to have this genocide. I mean, Rafah is what everybody's waiting for, an actual ground offensive on Rafah, which would be horrific, to make no mistake about that. And that for Biden would be basically that I don't think
he may go down with this ship.
Yeah, so he's doing...
Destroy him.
I don't really understand the difference between the two words, tactics and strategy. I think one is more long-term, but tactically he's trying to play, the Saudis are trying to play, let's put pressure on Israel by us signing just bilaterally some weapons, some stuff, and then maybe they'll come around. But, what was it? Nancy Pelosi and Schumer both said that Netanyahu has to go, and they're clear. Basically, what they think is that guy goes, we'll put in some nice kibbutz-loving guy, and everything can continue as it was before, which it's clear it's not going to. But yeah, I think there's a point.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a PR management strategy, as we've said,
Yeah, even though there's what the Russians call a permanent state, and what Trump loves to call a deep state who controls most of foreign policy, it matters when there's a blob in charge if they actually get fucked up, like the Tories in Britain just got last night, like 80% down. Yeah, I think that's a valid point too. Yeah, there's considerations that, if it was the middle of Biden's term, he would say, go the hell ahead. I'm not even going to build this pontoon, whatever the fuck he's doing, this pier. Just go ahead. I'm going to shut down TikTok. Nobody can see it.
Right, or have these fake fights with Netanyahu cursing him out. Right, all this stuff.
I mean, that's just... He's got a blank check. Everybody knows it. He said, whether there's a deal or not, we're going to go into Rafah. Meaning we don't give a fuck what America thinks.
And we're not going to do a damn thing we've declared.
There's a principle, a Marxist principle regarding the interconnectedness of everything and how everything is interrelated to everything else, in a certain way to a certain extent. And so when we talk about PR, like PR matters and perception matters, and it might not matter as much as actual policy, but all these things are interconnected. And sometimes I just feel like certain perspectives want to just make these monolithic statements about things, and it fails to appreciate the interconnectedness of everything when you try and pretend that there's these strong, solid lines of demarcation between different issues. And anyway, I don't know if that helps at all, but that's my frustration sometimes listening to the people that say, it's, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Greg, but there are leftists that accuse people. Anytime you say there's a Zionist lobby that is interested in, pursuing a certain policy against
anti-Semites,
that those people are, they're wrong and they're anti-Semitic, and for them to suggest such a thing just demonstrates their own depravity. Like, so
I think you're describing
clearly they're there.
A dialect, like you're describing a dialectic. So,
yes.
I mean, overall, the Marxist position is the Zionist lobby is a vassal state to Western monopoly profits, and they operate for that purpose. And then there's some controlling.
They also have effects backwards.
Yeah.
Onto the donor state.
Yeah, and then some of that Zionist lobby, it's all controlled by Western capital, can control some of the politicians in the United States, but it's ultimately controlled by them. And to say it's To say there's no divisions amongst the ruling classes is simplification. But then to overestimate them is another simplification. The truth is, there's two seemingly contradictory ideas, and the truth is somewhere in between. We go about getting them. But I think there is also a tendency. I think the tendency you're describing is correct. But there's also a tendency which can easily appeal to anti-Semitism to overestimate the power of the Zionists, which is also another simplistic viewpoint. And I think I'd like to. I'm about to have to get out and work, but I just want to add. I want to thank him for his presentation, and just add on it further. And if we notice that the U.S. strategy of the ruling class in the Middle East has basically been gangsterism to destroy any competition. And if we look at what Israel has done, Israel is used to attack Iran. Israel is used to attack Syria. Israel is basically there to stop any competition with U.S. banking and U.S. oil companies. And that is its purpose. And it kills its own people. It makes its own people unsafe to benefit for that process. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get back to work. Let y'all know.
Then I wanted to say this to you, but I'll then say it to Greg, because Max Perry made this. That's where this began, and we are continuing, it seems, in the same vein. I love it. But there's two agitators on Twitter X. Both of them are like brain-damaged MMA assholes. One is Jake Shields. The other one escapes me, a mustache guy. And they were both blocked, like really rabid anti-Semitism stuff, blocked by Elon Musk. And they both kind of, I think they paraphrasing, say they kissed the ring. And they came back with much more like incredible Jew hatred, And that seems to go back to your point, that is something that's perfectly acceptable to the lobby. People who would simply read that the what is it called, the AIPAC stuff, they are now stopping to fund Republicans who voted against the vote, and they say, look, they control our Congress, a foreign entity. That's what they would say. But there's only two places in this world where major US, I'm not sure which ones, but admirals, like high-ranking military officials, said it's our unsinkable aircraft carrier in the region. One is Taiwan, and the second was Israel. Absolutely true. Yeah, and that's the dialectic. It's feedback loops. They have effects on both sides. Even
but people who say, when they look at the world, when they look at the totality of everything, and think, here's what's going on. There's a Jewish plot to dominate the planet. They've created both capitalism and communism, and they fight it out amongst themselves, to control the world under Jewish sovereignty. Like, those people are the actual.
That's what's fair to call the actual far right, by the way. Not every fucking government in Europe, but that you can call the far right.
Right.
Because that's exactly the same. 1930s Germany. That's what it is. And then there's the other side, and I want to bring up my most hated European party, the KKE, the Communist Party of Greece, who, like, overtly, they have this big announcement saying, we consider this Gaza-Palestinian inter-imperial war. Palestinian-Israeli inter-imperial war. That's what they consider this, for fuck's sake. Worst revisionist party in the world.
Because they do the same thing with, Ukraine
and Russia.
And
yes,
they do that because, unless you're a Marxist-Leninist political party controlling the government, then you're just an empire. They've been really, really bad for a long time on their analysis. No Marxist-Leninist likes the KKE, really. Ian was going to join us. He's having technical difficulties. He's in a Sevastopol hotel, and it did let him down. So I know we're broadcasting to some of Ian's places, his forums, and so he's sorry he was not able to make it. He's supposed to be back, not next week, because he'll be on vacation next week too. But
assignment, we like to say he's on assignment. But anyway, yes, enjoy, Orthodox. Easter is coming up, the inauguration of Vladimir Putin. Then there's Victory Day, obviously. You're probably going to have a splashing old time. But if you're still watching us, I can break this up slightly with synthesis that I think Dust alluded to, when there's an idea and there's a thesis, the antithesis, and then it comes together. Just check this out. We might just play it twice because I love it. protesters answering the call. They find something that unites them, something they can finally agree on, which is let's go, Brandon.
So ostensibly, that's two different protest groups in opposition to each other, finding unity in opposing Joe Biden. His ratings are at like a 40-year low, I've heard.
Yeah, below every.
So the poor guy. It's not easy to be a popular figurehead of a declining empire, and I don't know what else he could do, but yeah, he's reviled widely, and it's not going to be easy going forward for any figurehead government to try and manage this debacle that's taking place on all fronts, and to try and spin it and try and make people happy, because ultimately it's the main contradiction of capitalism. It's they're pursuing an agenda. They can't help but pursue an agenda that is not in the best interest of the vast majority, and that's just the reality of capitalism. And so eventually those contradictions are going to catch up, and you're going to have a problem. And so now they're reckoning with that problem. But Greg, I do appreciate that it was a great presentation. I'm if I was smarter and more articulate, I would say I would do a better job of processing the issues and the dichotomies and the different perspectives, and how they're not really that different. I don't know. What are you guys have thoughts? Any more thoughts on Greg's issues? To me, I want to make it real neat. I want to put, this is one view, this is the other view, and this is the correct view. But it's so complicated. It's not that easy to do. And I think there's I think there's truth to what we agreed on and what we talked about last week, that it's somewhere in the middle. And but I don't know if everybody agrees with that.
I don't think there's much debate for foreign policy. I think domestically it's in the middle, too, very heavily influenced by the Zionist lobby. I would draw a line between the two areas.
So foreign policy, I mean, definitely nobody, I mean, I wouldn't say, the Zionist lobby is all powerful or is dragging the U.S. into things. Because again, I think with like Iran, we would have had a war with Iran 4 decades ago if the Zionist lobby had something to say about it. And ultimately it is, the establishment consensus, the consensus of all the, capitalist investor class that decides policy. But I think, I think there can be opportunism, and I think there can be, a way to exploit reality in such a way that forces the consensus in a certain direction where it would otherwise not want to go. And that's not necessarily due to the power of the lobby per se, but it's partially due to that, but it's partially due to just the reality of, really everything. So for instance, if Iran, let's just say Iran, it's a variable. If Iran just launches some missiles at Israel, the consensus is going to be, okay, we're going to have to declare war on Iran. We don't want to, but Iran is dictating what we have to do. And I think, there's factors like that can take place and force action in a certain direction where they otherwise would not. And I think the Zionist lobby could, Netanyahu could just launch some missiles, initiate World War III, and drag the U.S. in without them wanting to. They haven't done that yet, but they've been trying to do things like that. Anyway, it's not just black and white. It's not just the Zionists have no control over foreign policy, and ultimately the veto lies with the with the establishment consensus. I think they have agency, and they can be opportunistic.
Well, it's been brought up in relation to Soros, a Jewish billionaire. Is it important that he's a Jewish or Zionist, or that he's a capitalist and an imperialist?
I think he's actually anti-Zionist. He's never been a very big supporter of the state of Israel. He's not really happy with the state of Israel, but he does have a liberal agenda. it seems, and he's definitely anti-Russia, anti-China, pro
Right. He's
Western
he's
Empire.
an imperialist, anti-communist.
But Haim Saban, I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel. Now he's passed away, but I mean, how more upfront? You know, I mean, I don't know. Do we just not believe him?
Who
He
were
doesn't
you
care about
saying?
Israel.
Who?
What's that?
Adelson, you were saying?
Oh, Haim Saban.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
He was a media mogul, and he was, you know, one of his famous statements is, I engage in politics. I do a lot of political contributions, and I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel. So, I mean, you know, can he, you know, force the establishment consensus to declare war on Iran? No. But can he buy politicians? Can he like Bloomberg make the mayor of New York, you know, call these protesters anti-Semitic, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get reelected next year?
Or the current day Bill Ackman, a billionaire, and the two Seinfelds, the couple, can fund these anti-Palestine protests. You know, what can I add my little, because you always like to put a ribbon on the whole thing, and what I've learned in the last 10 years is, you know, when we talk about in Europe, like Brussels, we no longer talk about it as just Brussels, the city. It's deputized by the United States. And exactly the same happened to Ukraine. But when the United States gives an order, you're not supposed to attack Russian energy facilities because that's bad for my bottom line, my resolves. They can still go against that. But the same can happen in Israel. You're not supposed to do this and that. Well, who cares? 90-something% of the people want this war and agree with everything we're doing in Gaza. So fuck off, United States. They can do that. Even though they're fully bought subsidiaries.
You can be cynical and you can say the U.S. really doesn't care about high gas prices. They just don't want to be looked at being responsible for them. So as long as they can push the blame to Ukraine, it's like a wink, wink, nod, nod. You know, don't attack.
Oh, the hands,
US
the PR, the image that has to be washed and nice, and that's what's failing, and that's what's I think dangerous for them.
But
I mean, historically, that's been a big problem. High gasoline prices are a disaster here, right?
Yeah, especially for the party in power. It's
and the economy.
It's a domestic political consideration, and I agree with you. I don't believe that it's a wink, wink, nod, nod. I think the U.S. is actually unhappy, but they've empowered this entity to act how in their own interest, and their interest thinks, you know, hey, we've got to do this, and they're going to do it.
I think we all agree that Israel is far more important than Ukraine because of where it is, the energy-rich region of the world, far more important. Dust is back on foot, it seems. I'll add him. Hey. Don't know if you've been listening or you want to address any points.
Yeah, there's. I wanted to address the George Soros comment. I would argue that
I'm listening.
Earlier, I would argue that George Soros is not a liberal. George Soros is primarily an imperialist who uses progressive imagery for the benefit of imperialism. Like he doesn't actually doesn't support any of the causes that he claims to support, and he's not an accurate representation of those causes. And the causes that he does supposedly promote are simply ways of manipulating those causes for the benefit of imperialism.
I would agree with everything you said,
except
for the one part that this is not liberalism, because the Open Society Foundation,
he's not socially
liberal. He's not socially right on that. You're right on that.
But no, I mean, that's what I would define a liberal as somebody who pretends that they uphold principles. Like that's how I define a liberal. But
it's been 2 years.
No, I mean, liberalism is about liberalizing the bourgeoisie, basically. That he is a liberal. He's for free markets, free speech to liberate the bourgeoisie. You know,
it's been 2.5 years.
I think feudalism, is using a naive definition where liberals are actually genuinely believe in what these principles, and I don't think liberals by definition believe in their principles.
2.5 years of the SMO in Ukraine and 6 months of the slaughter, the genocide in Gaza, and these people, you have to be blind to not see the hypocrisy of liberals today, who can just say, you know, Ukraine is fighting for beautiful freedom and Western democracy, and so is Israel. Like, that's transparent now. I'm gonna probably try to. Thank you. You beat me.
Okay, so let's get to some comments. I want to include our great viewers. So yeah, Paulie's bringing up 4th of May Remembrance Day. So yeah, anti-Semitism is definitely real, and I mean it was definitely led to a lot of innocents dying in World War II, and again the Soviets were the primary. They were the ones that ended the Holocaust, liberated the death camps, and so I hope that in Amsterdam they're not giving the United States credit for that. But I'll bet they are.
Also, Yasha, I'll expand on this. The bad kind is called a choking agent. That's what they use for the authoritarian tear gas. So yeah, good point. Back in the beginning.
There are different degrees of chemical agents, ranging in severity. But yeah, who knows what they use on the universities compared to what they use in Georgia. I agree with Christy. Judaism isn't in conflict with Marxism, Leninism. It's Zionism. I am not sure what HR 6090 is. Anybody know?
Unfortunately, I don't. It sounds like an act, like in the U.S.
resolution,
U.S. bill, but I don't know it.
And then the May 4th demonstrations, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of people protesting and opposing Israel's actions. And again, those protests in Western Europe are going to be met with, violence, probably. I mean, who knows? But they're probably going to be repressed. These protests are probably going to be repressed. And those are the bad protests. So we support the good protests. We denounce the government ending those good protests in the state, the nation state of Georgia. But we denounce the protests in France and Western Europe and in the United States that oppose Israeli actions. And also not just opposing Israel actions. They're opposing the U.S. enabling. The U.S. is the prime enabler of Israel. Israel could not do what they're doing without the United States, and that needs to be made clear. And everybody needs to be reminded of that.
Adding a little bit to that, your protests, I mean, you have the most SWAT armored people cracking down on them, but they spread to most big Ivy League UK universities and a bunch of a Sorbonne, I think, and one other French, and there hasn't been such a crackdown yet. But yeah, I agree that's coming. But as to Paulie's point, these things, the British, I think, are blocking up a memorial to save it. That's from the government to convince people that, look, the Nazis are back. People who actually want to save Gaza are not going to attack fucking Holocaust memorials. They're not going to do that. It's the government saying, look, these terrible, horrible, what that idiot, we still don't know where he's from, Tom Cotton called mini Gazas, the terrorists. That's fear mongering, I would say.
So yeah, there's a definite PR, public relations strategy to depict these protesters as anti-Semitic, as hating Jews, and then there's a lot of false flags going on too. So you've had Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate on the Gray Zone have documented different instances where the people that are yelling "kill all Jews" have this Jewish Brooklyn accent.
Yep.
And they were having a good laugh at that. And so, the truth is there's that going on, and there might be actual anti-Semites, being, boisterous or being involved in these protests, but they're a tiny, tiny minority. And I don't even want to acknowledge that they even exist. It's possible, of course, because there are anti-Semites. But the vast, vast majority of these protesters are just protesting genocide. That's it. They just oppose genocide. And so for them to be depicted by our representatives like the despicable, disgusting turd of a human being, Todd Cotton. Is that his name? Tom. It's just they're the worst of the worst. And it's despicable, really, to try and pretend that these student protesters are anything but legitimately upset at our government enabling genocide, because that's what's really going on.
Look,
And
we can watch that bastard, but it's 40 seconds we'll never get back. Do you want to?
yeah, no, I'd like to, just to
All right.
see the human vermin in
Good.
action.
We're here to discuss the little Gazas that have risen up on campuses across America and the liberal college administrators and politicians who refuse to restore law and order and to protect other students. These little Gazas are disgusting cesspools of anti-Semitic hate, full of pro-Hamas sympathizers, fanatics, and freaks. The terrorist sympathizers in these little Gazas aren't peacefully protesting Israel's conduct of the war. They're violently and illegally demanding death for Israel, just like their ideological twins, the Ayatollahs in Iran.
Good deflection at the end, don't you think? That's a good redirection. There.
We needed to play that just so people have an idea of how ridiculous that motherfucker
It's
is.
insane.
Why
you
is
know,
it
his-
illegal to wish for death of Israel? Anyways, it's not.
But his constituency agrees with him about the protesters.
Biden
and-
does. He
and
finally
there-
addressed.
His constituency agrees with him about the protesters. Beat the crap out of them, jail them, throw them off the bridge, and at the same time they're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, you can protest whatever rights you want here or there, but going against major U.S. foreign policy, that's a no-no. That has to be beat down.
He's appealing to a minority, and it might be a majority of his constituency. It's
Well,
possible.
it's a majority.
Of his
Right now, it's a
constituency.
majority.
Okay,
Of Americans.
What I took away
No,
from that is
I would
majority
disagree.
of Americans, Carlo.
No, it is. I've done a study.
I think majority of Americans are have a primary emphasis on their economic concerns and their own well-being.
When it comes to Gaza, the majority of Americans can't even spell it. So let's
true.
get rid of this myth, okay? And the ones that can, that exist in the MAGA electorate, if you want, are anti-Semitic.
Come
The
on.
only reason they might support
And usually racist, and usually upper middle class and business owners and
whatever they are.
But
But the thing is that, and the only reason they would support Israel in its actions is to bring about Megiddo, the final war where Jesus Christ comes back. So Cotton believes that. Johnson is a thorough believer in that. So is Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, and I mean,
but MAGA is a very small minority of the United States.
So,
It's a very small minority.
well, whatever.
I really didn't.
Vocally, it's a small minority, but generally, it's a lot of people. 30% of Americans are evangelical Christians.
Okay.
So I don't know if those leaders actually espouse those Christian beliefs, or if they just pandered to them because they know they're popular among their own electorate. But if you do a polling, the polling is quite clear that a majority in the United States, especially of the young people, and it is kind of divided by age, but the young people are pro-Palestine, whereas the older generation is pro-Israel. But yes. I think if you look at a base majority, it's not in favor of Israel's actions. They oppose what Israel's doing. They want a ceasefire. That's the majority of people.
I think Republicans still support by a small majority.
That could be, but then it's Democratic.
And the biggest Zionist, I learned the biggest Zionist organization is Christian. So the right-wing Christians, like Carlos is saying, and Republicans. Some of his constituency.
This is the major point that Billy Bob said. This is the youth. I don't think they fall neatly into these categories. They can tune into TikTok, see people being unearthed from mass graves, being their hand tied, and they say this is wrong. And I couldn't be happier for that. I know you lovingly call them ninnies because they can't point it out on a map where Gaza is, but they can see this horrific crime.
I think I know what HR 690 is, 6090, and I think it goes. It talks. because of this demographic shift in perceptions regarding Israel-Palestine, that's why they're going after TikTok. And that also is why I'm assuming HR 6090 is the law that's saying, the
anti-Semitism law?
Yeah, the anti-Semitism law. And it says if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic, and you cannot tolerate criticism of Israel on the campus, or you won't get federal funding. I'm pretty
which
sure that's
includes the Christian Bible, by the way, which claims that the Jews, as an example in that bill, that the Jews killed Christ. That is now anti-Semitic by law. If Biden signs it, he hasn't signed it, I think, to the best of my knowledge, but it has passed.
But all of this censorship and these laws, this legislation is due to the fact that they're not being able to control the narratives, and the polling data scares them, right? With the amount of young people not going along with the Israel consensus. So I think, we just got to understand that. What did Christie say? White power dictates to uphold and continue to exploit racism. Yeah, it's a divisive tactic.
Look, I lost my train of thought. But let's go back to Vietnam, okay? Maybe it'll come back to me. Okay, Vietnam. Chomsky talks about going around to talk with his anti-war message. 5 or 6 years after Dien Bien Phu, so the United States had firmly taken over the war in Vietnam by then. He would go and he would talk to 2 or 3 people in their living room, and then finally the protests after the Tet Offensive, boom, the people didn't want the war anymore, but they still voted for Nixon on the notion that Nixon and Kissinger, you can believe this, Nixon and Kissinger had a peace plan, which they lied. They had nothing, so that's how much they were really paying attention to it. And
so if you're going to argue that Americans are underinformed,
then there were thousands of people in the streets. But by the same token, the reason that people were relieved to have the Vietnam War over is myriad. Some of it's very personal. Some of it was very ideological. But it was myriad, but it was not informed. Largely not informed. I was there. They were not informed.
I understand. I'm not going to argue with.
And now they're not informed.
But as to
I think I have a
go dust.
I think I have a root of this long-going discussion between what I see as liberal cynicism and Marxist optimism. And I think it goes. No, that's my seatbelt. No, but what I think that it comes down to, it doesn't matter what the majority of Americans think. What we're in is a protracted class war. And what I went out to my May Day demonstration on May 1st, and in Durham, and I'm in the South, which is it's a right-wing state. It's gerrymandered to the point where it's completely Republican controlled. The teachers are under assault. There's horrible conditions. There's criminalization. And I went out there, and it was hosted by, it was facilitated by PSL, but the majority of the speakers, who were very in support of Palestine, were mostly the oppressed workers and the working class. It was the Fight for 15 movement. It was the domestic workers. It was the tobacco workers, the agricultural workers. And they understood. These workers would be facing the worst conditions and one of the most exploited portions of the country, understood solidarity with Palestine. And we marched over to the university and we supported the Duke University students. And we heard speeches from them. So it's my optimism that I don't have to convince the majority of Americans. I just simply have to organize the most effective and most untreated workers within our system to build a power informed systems that can build off the problems with this current system and eventually overtake it. So I'm very optimistic, regardless of the majority of view of Americans.
And you sound like everybody I knew in the 60s.
Yeah, but it's not exactly the 60s anymore, Carlo.
Look where we are now. It's far worse.
No, yes, it's far worse, and we have more contradictions. They have less power. They have less soft power. They don't. They can't afford to bribe off as large of a portion of the population anymore. They're losing influence around the world. We're in a position that has more, I would say, more advantageous conditions for revolution than
Right.
basically the height of the empire within the 60s.
Exactly.
I agree. And just ripping off that point, the 60s, you were part of that big anti-war movement. I think you think it failed for some reason because people still voted for Nixon. But what was apparent, not just because of the anti-war protest, but because of, the Treasury going pretty much impoverished, is they cannot afford body bags coming home. That's when they started deputizing one country against the other and using Ukraine and using other places because that's something they couldn't afford.
Well,
That is something
the-
that is different today. So
one
is
of the biggest, proxies, using proxies. They learned. But one of the biggest things about Vietnam that caused the end of the war was conscription. It was the draft.
Yeah, that was the lesson they learned.
Yeah. So, but I don't know.
To expand on how difficult things are going, I don't know. Ian's the main military guy, but do you want to talk about some military matters, or are you still, because this is a fertile ground if you have some thoughts here?
I want to mention one thing about domestic politics in this country. Tennessee now requires, they passed a law that all the teachers, all the janitors, all the principals in their schools are armed, carry guns.
Yeah, that's scary to me because we're still
That's
nowhere as bad.
Okay.
Jesus.
That was inconceivable in the 60s. Inconceivable.
We had
I'm not sure that's going to end well for Tennessee, but that's
no kidding.
The entire history of Hungary, going back more than 1,000 years, we had one school shooting and never again, and even that was like 15 years ago. So we're nowhere near that. It scares the shit out of me what's happening with you guys.
So on the other hand,
also a small point adding to what Dust says in the nice, friendly South. The video we saw about the "Fuck Joe Biden" chorus, that was University of Alabama, a really nice place. I did not mean to belittle the 2,200 already arrested and pretty brutal crackdown in, New York and Columbia University. I didn't mean to belittle. That's not the picture of all of these protests, obviously.
Let's talk about the police a little bit too before we go. Okay?
Do you want to? Because I wanted to. Okay, well,
I just want to briefly say the scuttlebutt about the police. I was, they're not wearing jackboots yet, and then I finally looked at their footwear, and they're wearing jackboots, just like
trained by Israel too.
Yeah, so trained by Israel, but they're letting the anti-Palestinian protesters, the Zionist protesters, just do anything they want to the
Did you see that they're shooting fireworks into the Palestinian camps, like fireworks that explode there and go,
and bags full of mice and stuff like that, just all kinds of stuff you would think they get right from the Linebarger Ed Lansdale playbook.
And they get away scot-free.
They get away scot-free. So what does that tell you about the police and a police state? They like Lafayette Square, where they drove all the protesters out. So Trump could pull a Bible out of his ass, which he never read, was all caked with his shit, and hold it up. Give me a break. We can't oversimplify this stuff, guys, with this class war stuff, because it's very complex. You're not going to get anywhere with it.
No, it's complex. I mean, what you can see clearly is the hypocrisy and like you were saying, how they treat the pro-Israel people versus how they treat the, anti-Israel people.
No, but the cops are anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
if Max Berry was here, he would have made that point. Joke.
Joke. I'm trying to talk earlier.
We ever heard too. So,
go ahead. Dust, do you want to chime in?
No, I was just saying Greg hasn't talked in a bit.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Great.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and on board of Dust's optimism right now. You know, it's rare in America to have this many people in motion and energized, and there's some real radical energy. I mean, I've seen videos of crowds unarresting people, um, barricades being smashed, and occupations being reestablished after the police took them down. In DC, the police refused to take down one of the encampments. So this is rare. You know, this happens once a decade, maybe.
Couple of decades. Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, what the press and everybody's ignoring is the crowds were far larger for the second invasion of Iraq, far larger, and the government just did what it was going to do.
yeah.
You know, it just
Yeah,
So
the anti-war movement of the second Iraq War just went away, didn't it? Just like Occupy,
yeah.
just went away.
Well,
on-
Occupy was
Uh,
repressed. It didn't
Yep,
go away.
that's-
yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I would have the same point. I was part of Occupy. Occupy was brutally suppressed, just like the student.
Yeah.
Brutal
Yeah.
Occupy, and this has been the playbook of every single major movement in the United States since I've been alive, going back to the beginnings of Black Lives Matter, Occupy, Wall Street, and then Black Lives Matter and Swing, Palestinian. It's brutal suppression and hot, big money co-optation. They killed off the majority of the leaders of Black Lives Matter and co-opted the rest of them. Like, we're in the belly of the beast. We have strong enemies. It doesn't mean that people aren't wanting, willing, and ready, and you can see it within the spontaneous movement. We just got to put some organization onto it and build some power behind the sentiment.
Yeah, you know, and the worse the economic situation for ordinary people, you know, everyday, the price of everyday goods get, the more fertile ground to question the bullshit. Because every economist that runs opinion pieces that it's you, the economy's fine. Why don't you see it? That's what they're running with. And the worse it gets, the better. I think the better it is for potential organization. I do want to transition a little bit to some good news in the end around Ukraine, if anybody permits it. But, you know, there might be some other thoughts around here.
well, I had several and I've forgotten them all, like Carlo.
Oh, no soapbox today, Billy Bob?
Okay. Give me a second. Go ahead. Let's talk about Ukraine.
I want to bring the good news here because it's not necessarily for Americans, unfortunately. For Europeans, maybe we've been suffering enough because of the machinations here, you know, Nord Stream and all that. But the U.S. military machine, I mean, the PR is very damaged. The U.S. is isolated at the UN level, pretty much everywhere around the world. The PR is not working. But the military side, there was this stunning article ran by the Jerusalem Post, right? One of the biggest Zion newspapers, that during Operation Truthful Promise, these fucking interceptors that were, shot from the Patriot system, that apparently Ukraine is clamoring over. We need 7 of them, but 25 to protect the country. 1 out of 10 hit their targets. I mean, Israel just admitted their shit. I haven't seen the actual, you know, reaction on the graph go down for whoever does that, Raytheon maybe. But that was, I think, an enormous, we're going to switch to something else. And that's the shit that Ukraine wants. And we don't have enough interceptors for it anyway, to send to Hong Kong, the wars you want there, to send to Ukraine, to send to Israel. And in the meantime, I mean, when it comes to wise moves, TM, this guy takes the cake. He says it like it is. I don't know if it's a good move, but check this out.
If you cannot produce enough of interceptors to help Ukraine win the war against the country that wants to destroy the world order, then how are you going to win in the war against perhaps an enemy who is stronger than Russia? Think 2 steps ahead. People come up with some most incredible arguments to explain why Ukraine does not deserve to be supported. But the very simple fact is, if you lose in Ukraine, it will have a domino effect, and you will start losing everywhere.
Look, still begging but threatening, and he does everything in his power not to say China, you know, like Trump says. But that's the main point. I've never seen anything like this, even from Mr. Harry Potter, Tiny Face, Kuleba. I have some.
Yeah,
other
it's not
things,
looking good for Ukraine, and I mean, they're gonna say and do everything and anything they can think of to try and get the U.S. to save them, and that just means World War III. It just means Western boots on the ground, and I'm not sure the West is gonna do that. I
Nope.
mean,
Or another
Macron has
comment,
been threatening that, it's on the table, but he can't say it's off the table. Of course, he has to say it's on the table, but I don't think there's. I think I don't think the U.S. is interested in escalating it there, but hopefully they can.
I have a poignant question towards. I have a question for Ben. I think it gets to the crux of the flaws.
Listening to the question while playing a video, no sound.
What
the particular speaker, and my question is, how has the European labor movement fared with the increase of profits extracted from Ukraine? And how have the European people fared after the escalation of the war in Ukraine? And I think it directly, it's exact opposite of what the speaker was saying.
The exact opposite of what? Sorry.
Of what the speaker was saying, that they're going to win, that they win if Ukraine wins. And what has been the conditions for European workers and their labor movement since neoliberalism in Ukraine, profits extracted, and then the economic fallout with the conflict?
Well, everything is in a downward spiral, which the Brits love to call a cost of living crisis, which is, inflation because of severing all ties with Russia. And now they're trying to sever all ties with China, which would be an even more colossal mistake. So I'm just liking that they're doing everything to speed up this process of impoverishing Europe. As for the workers' movement, 1990, when the Soviet Union was around, that was the last time we actually had something of a communist party. There's tiny parties, CPGB, ML, that sort of stuff in Britain. But what we call socialists here is kind of what you call Democrats in the US. They're complete traitors to the working classes. So, people go to different alternatives. One is sort of the Christian conservatives that we have in Hungary, Orban, who says, I'm actually going to have a sovereign foreign policy. The other is Fico, who is the same kind of social democrat like the Democratic Party, but he also says, I'm going to have a sovereign policy. And that is the wildfire they want to stop at any. It just doesn't work around the old, the 1990s left and right anymore, because they even call Fico far right, who, as far as I'm concerned, is to, Chomsky-esque guy. The thing is, that paradigm is really over. It's more of a top-down, people versus comprador or ownership class, and it's bad. But I do see a huge renaissance coming, not in the least from the emerging multipolar China-Russia world, and sovereignty, as in not comprador governments. I really think, I hope, is going to be a major factor in that. Is my immediate thoughts.
I remember a thought I had about 10 minutes back, and it was involving the protests, and if we have a reason to be optimistic. And I'm just thinking about the Democratic National Convention, and what a shit show that will be.
Oh, God.
And it's like I just feel bad. You got to feel bad for these figureheads that are put in charge of being the face of this empire, because people are fucking sick to death of them. And yet they have to go through the motions. They have to do what they're going to do to pretend that, we're this, liberal democracy that, why doesn't everybody love us? We're all about
human rights, freedom.
Yeah.
It's empty now. It's hollow.
It's totally hollow. And yet, so there's going to be a lot of real angry people. And I wonder if they're going to even cancel the Democratic National Convention and just do it online. I'm thinking they're probably going to do it online because they don't want to deal with the spectacle of so many angry fucking people.
If they didn't do it in 1968, they're not going to do it now.
So they canceled it, right? They canceled it back then?
No, they didn't cancel it. They beat the shit out of the demonstrators.
Right.
In Chicago. Well, we have a man, Greg Rosen, from Chicago. That was one of the worst beatings I've seen protesters take in my lifetime.
So you think they'll just do the same thing?
Yeah, and it's interesting because if I remember correctly, the two candidates were Nixon and Humphrey, and both of them were for the war. It's like it is now with Trump and Biden. They're both, I mean, Jesus Christ, what a choice. You know,
Right.
it's like, it's terrible.
It's the best democracy money can buy. The best they
Right.
can give us is old man Biden, who's senile, or old man Trump, who's a mindless narcissist. Yeah, it's a tough. It's not easy for them. Have some empathy, Carlo.
I'm
Imagine being a
trying.
billionaire right now. It's
I'm
got to
trying.
be tough.
It's always tough. It's a hard, life of work is what they say, I think. Can I just quickly address this? The thing is, it is exactly relevant because a lot of the people are planning for 5 years, 10 years. Rishi Sunak said, we're going to have a war economy by 2030. And now apparently the Germans and the Italians are working on the future laser super tank by 2040. That's how stupid they think. When in the meantime, the major players, Avril Haines, director of national intelligence, went in front of Congress and said, we expect a breakthrough in May or June on the front lines in Ukraine. Con Coughlin, one of the worst British, I think a background in military, who's always been a big Ukraine will win, will destroy Russia, is saying, holy shit, they might not survive the coming Russian massive offensive. Imagine if this falls apart before November. I am in that camp. I know Ian's not here to defend his point of view, which 2026 or something, but we'll have that conversation at a later date. Just imagine this falling in the lap of Mr. the 100-year-old zombie, who I think is going to die in office if he actually gets to rig the game enough. He gets elected again.
But I want to address Christie's statement too. I think Ukraine matters very little, and you're right. Ultimately, it matters very little, but there was this battle over the aid going to primarily Ukraine, but that was all political. So you're right; it was a surface battle, and I don't think there's much interest in Ukraine now in the United States among the general population. They're very,
and I'm biased because they're our neighbor to the east.
Yeah. And I have to say also, I kind of agree with Ian, because every night I look at the progress that the Russians are making and taking territory in Ukraine, and it's very slow. I know that talking about a war of attrition, but you get to a point where when are they going to attrite the Ukrainian military?
Why do you think every different day of the week Macron has a different opinion about sending his troops in? I think he's got more information than we does, and I think it looks very, very grim. Because, as you said, the Russians are not fighting for territory; they're fighting to kill every last one of these bastards. That's pretty explicit now.
He's talking. Go ahead, Greg.
He made a new statement about this yesterday, right? Again,
who did?
Macron.
He did a big, very dark interview with The Economist. It's got a full transcript and everything about, the blitzkrieg that overran France back in, before World War II. And we are at that moment. There's a triple threat facing us, and, very, very, very scary. That's what he did. But, before that, he said, no need for this. And then the British guy, the foreign secretary, whoever the hell is, says there's no need to send troops. He's having a panic attack every second day of the week. It's perfect. It's in his character, and it's lovely to see. And I think I know why. There's not going to be a French or British Odessa, and I think they know it. There's not going to be a Ukrainian Kharkov.
I think the next administration, whoever it is, it's going to be their job to accept the loss and make the best out of it, and then pivot to China. That's going to be, so they're just trying to, they're trying to keep the status quo until November. But like we're saying, that might not be possible, because Russia might, not let the status quo last until November. But, that's the next administration. Their job is going to be to take the L. It's going to be less politically damaging to whoever that is, because it'll be the beginning of their term. And then they're going to do a pivot to China. But
to back up a little bit on
with
Ukraine,
what weapon, what army? I'm listening.
Right.
Talking about sending 2,000 people initially. Now, I know Ian poo-pooed that logistically it would be easy to do, but I got to tell you, I have to go with the Ritter and Douglas McGregor, and people that know a lot about that. And they say that even 2000, the logistics would be very difficult, especially given where France is and where Ukraine is, to substantially support that 2,000 troops. And then he's talking of escalating to 20,000, but his very own people, his very own military is saying, "No way, you dumb little prick! We're not doing that."
He can't. And by the way, 2,000 people, in other words, that's 2 battalions. And Ritter, in a recent interview, I don't recall which podcast it was, said that the average lifespan of a battalion in intensive warfare like the one in Ukraine is 3 days. So that's what he's talking about. I mean, what did Germany send to one of the Baltic midgets, maybe Lithuania? They sent about 25 people. That's pretty much the Macron, the size of actual force they can project. It's nothing.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Greg Rosen's pissed. I know we've been on for long, but maybe you want... Greg Rosen's the British correspondent, the correspondent in Moscow of the BBC, who we absolutely love to hate.
He just happens to have the same name as our Greg Rosen?
Jesus, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. Rosenberg, sorry.
Oh, gotta go in there.
I'm an idiot.
Is his first name Greg? Is his first name Greg?
No, Steve Rosenberg. I just got mixed up. I'm sorry.
Right.
Wow. Talk about a libel. Anyway, sorry, Greg. Sorry,
Greg,
that.
if you're watching. Maybe we'll enjoy this as a winding off, or maybe some concluding thoughts. Go, Billy Bill.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to just conclude because we're at 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Let's conclude.
I appreciated the discussion. I appreciate Dust James coming to us from his workplace, as always. And so anything else, Dust? I know we haven't let you get in for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Ben's answer to my question.
Yeah.
And I would say in Europe, I think European sovereignty, is directly opposed to basically U.S. hegemony in a way. Yeah. And it needs to be supported. But I would say there's a reason why the anti-immigrant politicians are the ones speaking the loudest voices for that sovereignty. And they're part of the war against the oppressed workers, the immigrants within that country. And that creates a division. That helps paint the pro-sovereignty as the right wing. And I think similar to the United States, I'd like to see a unity between the most exploited workers and anti-imperialist sentiment. And I think there's some problems with the right-wing sovereignty movement, Trumpism, and I think it's designed that.
Yeah.
And to smear that position.
I know
it's a big can of worms to open right at the end of the show. But
yeah, sorry, that would take a long time. But as far as if you're talking about, Marine Le Pen and to an extent Orban, I guess I agree with you. But it's just it's a complex topic. Yeah.
But it's
thanks for having me on, and it's been a great discussion. I enjoyed the presentation.
We enjoyed all of your company. Thank you, and thank you, Greg, for the presentation as well.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
Okay, yeah, we will have both of you guys back very soon. We'll be back Tuesday with episode 78. I was gonna give my 2 cents on what you guys were just talking about, but we'll save it for next week. We always have time next week. So we will see you then, and just thanks again.